In this video, we'll learn about securing Amazon API Gateway using Lambda Authorizers. In the previous video, we built a serverless CRUD application using AWS Lambda, DynamoDB, and API Gateway. Now we'll try to secure this API Gateway route using Lambda Authorizers. Hey everyone, this is Mukesh from codewithmukesh.com, and this video is part of my ongoing .NET on AWS series on my YouTube channel, where we explore various AWS services and how we as .NET developers can get started with them. This video is sponsored by AWS. So before getting started, here are the prerequisites. I assume that you already have an AWS account. Even a free tier account would do. I'll provide the link in the description. And also your system should be authenticated to use AWS services. You can follow the step-by-step guide where we authenticate our system using AWS CLI profiles. You must also have a good knowledge of AWS Lambda and Amazon API Gateway since we are going to be working with that. For this, you can refer to the previous videos in this playlist. Also, ensure that you have .NET 6 or above SDK installed on your machine. What are the different ways to secure Amazon API Gateway? Amazon API Gateway endpoints are exposed to the public, and it is very crucial that we enforce some kind of security to it. The different ways to secure an Amazon API Gateway are using Lambda Authorizers and Cognito Authorizers. So Lambda Authorizers are a more flexible mode of authorization where we can write our own custom logic to control authorization. We'll be using this authorizer type to build a system that can generate JWT tokens, which will be validated and used to access protected resources, or in this case API endpoints. So the API gateway would then use the response of the Lambda authorizer to determine whether the incoming request has enough permissions to access the API or not. Secondly, we have Cognito Authorizer, where we'll have to specify identity providers such as AWS Cognito that can essentially generate JWTs for you. For the scope of this video, we'll be exploring only the Lambda Authorizer approach. In a later video, we'll talk about securing Amazon API Gateway with Cognito. Now, let's learn about the Lambda Authorizer. So this is technically an AWS Lambda that can be attached to any Amazon API Gateway to control access to your API endpoints. When a client would send a request to the Amazon API Gateway, internally the gateway calls the attached Lambda Authorizer, which takes a token from the parameter or body of the request, validates it, and returns an IAM policy or an indication that the request is authorized or not. So we as a developer will be completely responsible to determine if the incoming request is validated or not. So in this video, we'll be building a Hello World Lambda, or rather a simple Lambda, attach it to an API Gateway route, and try to secure the route with an Lambda Authorizer. We'll be building our own authorization system, making use of JWTs. So this will give you a complete end-to-end idea. I'll also be attaching the link to the complete source code of whatever we are going to build in this video. You can find all the important links in the description. So in the system design, we'll have a couple of Lambdas and other possible services that can be attached to the Amazon API Gateway. Now these API endpoints are publicly accessible to anyone who has the URL endpoint. In order to secure these routes, we introduce another Lambda which acts as an authorization system, or in our case, we call it as Lambda Authorizer. So, for instance, every time the client sends a request to the protected API route with a valid token at the request header, this token is passed to the Lambda Authorizer, where it pulls it, validates it, and returns an appropriate access policy. Now, this policy can be set to allow or deny based on the validity of the token. With that, access is granted to the protected resource. You can attach one Lambda Authorizer to multiple API routes, as well as create one authorizer per route. For this demonstration, we'll be building the following resources. We'll first build a Lambda that prints Hello World. So this is the resource that we're going to secure. Then we'll have a Lambda that can generate a valid token. So this is just for demonstration purpose. Ideally, this should be done by an external identity provider. Then we'll have a Lambda to validate the token. This is going to be our Lambda Authorizer, which is going to protect the Hello World Lambda. And finally, we'll attach all these Lambdas to the Amazon API Gateway. Open up Visual Studio and create a new AWS Lambda project. So click on File, New Project, and search for AWS Lambda C# project. I'll name a project as Hello World, and the solution name is Lambda Authorizer.demo. In the next screen, you'll have to choose a blueprint. As of now, select Empty Function and proceed. So this will be the Lambda that is going to be protected by our Lambda Authorizer. So right click on this project, manage dependencies, and we'll have to install API Gateway events here, if you remember it from the previous videos. Let me search for API Gateway and get it installed. As of now, the latest version is 2.7.0. So once that is installed, we'll go back to our function and make very minor changes so that our function returns a simple hello world message. So let me change it here, hello world. And also make sure that you're using the API request from the package that we installed. So once that's installed, let me build this project and let's deploy it to our AWS Lambda. So right click on the hello world project and publish to AWS Lambda. Here, make sure that you have selected your AWS credentials and the appropriate region. For me, my profile is default and the region is AP South 1. Here, I'll give my Lambda a name, hello world. So once that is done, click on next. In the next screen, you'll have to select a rule. For instance, we just need a basic execution rule for this Lambda. So I'll be selecting AWS Lambda basic execution rule from this list and click on upload. This will essentially package your Lambda and upload it to AWS. As you can see, the Lambda is now uploaded. Now let's navigate back to our AWS Management Console and attach this Lambda to a new API gateway. Back in our AWS Management Console, we can see that our Hello World Lambda is successfully uploaded. If you can see, this is our uploaded function and it has been modified 2 minutes ago. Next, let's open up API Gateway. And create a new HTTP API. Click on Build. I will name this API Gateway as Demo. Click on Next. As of now, we are not configuring any integrations. We'll do that later. Click on Next. We'll keep everything as it is and click on Next. Once that is done, we'll review these changes and click Create. So here, we'll create our first route. Click on Create. Let's make it a get method and this will be the route of this method. Click Create. Select on the created route and let's attach an integration. For this, we'll create and attach a new integration that will be along with AWS Lambda. So here, just select Lambda function and make sure you're selected the region where your Lambda is uploaded. Here, I will choose my Hello World Lambda. Once that is done, make sure that you grant the API permissions to invoke your Lambda. With that, click on Create. Now, to get the URL of your API, let's navigate back to our API Gateway, which is here. As you can see, this is the invoke URL of the API Gateway. Let me open this up in a new tab. And as you can see, this is the hello world message that we have created via our Lambda. So the task in hand for us is to secure this API URL so that only clients with appropriate permissions can access this URL. So next, we'll be creating a Lambda that can generate JSON Web Tokens for us. So let's switch back to Visual Studio. And under the same solution, let's create a new AWS Lambda project. So click on Add, New Project. Select AWS Lambda, and this time let's name it Token Generation. Click on Create, and again in the blueprint, click on Empty Function and proceed. So again, once the dependencies are all resolved, right click on the token generation. Let's install the required packages by clicking Manage NuGet Packages. Browse. So the same thing, API Gateway events we'll have to install. Let me search for it. So let's get it installed. And this time around, since we're dealing with JWT tokens, let's install that also. So ensure that you're installing this particular system.identity model or tokens. Let's get that installed. So once that is installed, let me go back to the function and paste in the method that I have already kept ready. So let's go through this method line by line. For demonstration purpose, I have taken the liberty to hardcode a demo user whose details will be part of the claims of the token that we will generate. So in production-like scenarios, you will need to replace this entire section wherein you pass the username and password to this Lambda and it gets checked against the data store or your custom authentication solution. Here, we are creating a new user object with name and email that will be part of the claims. In the next step, we'll be creating a list of claims using the previously hard-coded data. We'll be hashing a particular key that is hard-coded here as well and creating a new sign-in credentials. So we'll be using the sign-in credentials to generate a token. Note that this particular generated token will expire in 5 minutes and this can be configurable as well. So using all this, we'll be generating the token and returning it back to the client. So with that clear, let's upload this Lambda as well. So right click on the token generation project, publish to AWS Lambda. Make sure you click on create new function and let's name it token generation. Click on next and here let's reuse the existing role. So that will be Lambda execution role of hello world that we created in the previous Lambda upload. Select this and click on upload. So once that is done, let's navigate back to our AWS management console. Here, let's add a new route to the existing AWS API gateway. So click on API, select the gateway that we created, that is demo, and let's create a new route. Click on create. And this time around, let's make it as a post method and let's name it generate. Click on create. And to this post method, we'll have to attach the Lambda that we uploaded now. So click on attach integration. Let's create a new integration and select AWS Lambda. And here we'll have to attach the token generation Lambda. Click on it and ensure that you have this access granted and click on create. So now we have our Lambda attached to the generate endpoint. To test this, I'll open a Postman. So before that, I'll just grab the URL of the API gateway. So let me copy paste that. And let's open up Postman. On Postman, let me create a new tab, paste the URL here, and select the method as post. So this endpoint is going to be generate, and click on send. As you can see, this is the token generated by our Lambda. Let's copy this and verify the claims. Let's open up the browser and ensure that you open jwt.io. Here, let's paste in the access token. And as you can see, these are the claims that we have passed as part of a Lambda. So now we have two Lambdas. One is a Lambda that we need to secure, that is the hello world Lambda, and the other Lambda that can generate tokens. Next, we need to create the Lambda Authorizer. So let's jump back to Visual Studio and create another new project. Right click on the solution, add new project, and select AWS Lambda once again. Let's name it Lambda Auth. Click on create, select the empty function blueprint and click on finish. Once again, once the dependencies are done, right click and manage NuGet packages. Here as well, we'll have to install API gateway events and the JWT packages. Let me install the API gateway events, followed by the JWT identity models. So once that is done, let's go back to function.cs and paste in our methods. So let's go line by line. The token generated by our previous Lambda will be passed as a request header to this particular Lambda. So this happens after we attach this Lambda to the API gateway as Lambda Authorizer. So in this line, we'll be reading the token from the request header with the name authorization. We will then try to extract the claims principal from this authorization token. That will be from the get claims principal method. So if we navigate here, we'll be trying to validate this token by passing in the authorization token itself and validation parameters. Here, for instance, we'll be validating the lifetime as well. Feel free to configure this as per your requirement. So to this particular method, if we are passing a valid authorization token, it will return a valid claims principal. If the passed token is invalid, it will return a null. Next, by default, we initialize the effect as deny. And if the claims principal is not null, we will reset the effect to allow, and we will be generating the principal ID from the claims. Finally, we'll have to return back an object of type authorizer response, which will have the principal ID and couple of policies. So here, the effect will be allow or deny. The resource will be the route of the incoming API request, and the action will be set to execute API. Essentially, this means that when a token is valid, we send back a response with effect as allow and the resource of the API gateway ARN. Else, it will be a deny effect. So based on this response, the API gateway decides whether to allow or reject the client request. With that done as well, let's upload this Lambda. Before that, let me build this project. Once that is done, right click on the Lambda auth and click on Publish to AWS Lambda. Here, select Create New Function and let's name it Lambda auth. Click on Next. Here, select the existing role and click on Upload. So once that is done, let's navigate back to our AWS Management Console. Let's go back to routes of the API gateway. This is the particular endpoint that we need to secure, which is the get method. So the basic essence of authorizers is that you get to attach authorizers to each of the routes. So when I click on get method and click on attach authorization. Here, let's create an authorizer. As of now, since we have a Lambda authorizer, click on Lambda. Let me name it myauth. I'll choose the Lambda authorizer, which is the Lambda auth, and keep the payload version as 2. Here, since our Lambda authorizer returns a IAM policy, let's select IAM policy here. And as of now, let's disable caching. We'll come to this section in a later point of this video. Let me disable this and create an attach. Now, this means that we have essentially attached our Lambda authorizer to the Hello World Lambda. Let's navigate back to routes. And you can verify this particular authorizer is being attached to this particular. Now, let's grab the URL of the API gateway. Open it up in a new tab. As you can see, now we are getting an unauthorized message. Let me copy this URL and open a Postman. Let's create a new tab. Paste it here, set it to get method and click on send. Again, we are getting an unauthorized message. So we'll go back to the previous tab where we generated a JSON Web Token. Let me recreate it because it might have already expired. Let's copy to the clipboard, go back to the new tab and click on headers. Here, let me type in authorization. And paste in the JWT token and click on send. As you can see, the request is now authenticated since we have added the JSON Web Token to the header of this particular request. So once the token is expired, you'll get back the 401 error again unless you provide a fresh token again. So feel free to attach the same authorizer to other endpoints as well. So this is how easy it is to secure an Amazon API gateway. Another important topic that I wanted to discuss is the caching mechanism of the Lambda Authorizer. One possible issue with Lambda Authorizer is that every time you invoke any secure URL of the API gateway, the Lambda Authorizer is also triggered. This can mean an increased invoke of the Lambdas and will result in the increase in your overall AWS costs. So to handle this, the Lambda Authorizer responses can be cached for a particular amount of time. Let me go back to my APIs, click on demo, select the endpoint that is secured by the Lambda Authorizer and click on configure authorization. So here, let's edit the authorizer and allow caching for this. Here, we have set it to 300 seconds, which means the authorizer response will be cached for 300 seconds and only after the 300 seconds, the Lambda will be triggered again. So this way, we can minimize the Lambda invocations and thus the costs. That's it for this video, and in the next video, we'll learn about hosting an entire ASP.NET Core Web API with AWS Lambda. So this will be a very critical step to learn about hosting your .NET application as serverless. You can find the source code of the project that we built in this repository. I will link this as well in the description. Note that all the source code of the projects that we'll ever build in this playlist will be available under the single repository. Another important note is that since we have created almost 3 Lambdas, 1 API gateway, and probably a couple of CloudWatch groups, ensure that you delete all of them so that you don't leave behind any unused resource. Also, to read the text version of the video, you can refer to this blog article for which I have linked in the description as well. I hope you have enjoyed this video, so do not forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more upcoming videos. Until then, thank you.